Welcome to Straight Talk. Dairy farmers have good reason to smile with Fonterra's announcement this week of an increase of 40 cents per kilogramme of milk solids in their predicted payout. International prices are high, and with demand beginning to outstrip supply, the co-op is confident enough to suggest farmers work on a similar income next season. However, the Kiwi dollar's at a 4-month high against the US currency, with indications it could go higher. Meanwhile, the dairying model might be emulated by the red meat industry if a proposal due to go to the government's primary growth partnership is successful. Today I'm joined by National Business Review's news editor Ellen Reid and interest.co.nz's Bernard Hickey. Bernard, this is great news for dairy farmers and the whole economy, isn't it? The dairy price rise?
That's right. It'll add about $500 million in fresh money into the local economies, and they need it at the moment because right now the economy is struggling a bit to get out of the recession. Doing okay in the cities thanks to the housing market, but in the provincial areas they really need it, and obviously farmers need it to begin repaying these debts. And this money won't go into new tractors or cars, it'll go straight into debt repayment or interest payments for those farmers who may have struggled before.
So much of it is already spoken for? That's
right, and farmers too will be, after their fright of the last couple of years, be keen to reduce some of that debt. And the banks this time around, instead of suggesting that they go out and buy another farm, will be saying, thank you very much, I'll have that money back.
Is there any indication that rural bankers might ease up just a little on those constraints that they have placed on dairy farmers over the last 12 to 18 months or so?
Well, it's important for all farmers to realise that right now the big banks and the Reserve Bank are in negotiations about the capital requirements that banks need for rural lending. And there were due to be tougher capital requirements introduced at the end of June, but the Reserve Bank has delayed it. Now, most farmers will have to pay probably an extra 50 basis points on their loans if this change goes through. And so, unfortunately, it means that the banks are being a little bit cautious about lending, particularly over the next 6 months as they work out what the Reserve Bank is saying. The fact the Reserve Bank has extended that deadline until the end of this year is good news. It's probably going to save farmers more than the extra they would have gained from the payout. So one to watch for farmers, what's happening between the Reserve Bank and the banks.
Right. Now, Ellen, I guess that it's been fairly well predicted that interest rates will be going up by the end of the year. Farmers will be concerned about this as they're sort of planning forward over the next few months, as with the rest of the economy.
They will be. It seems that we're out of the recession. You know, there are various concerns around how strongly and how quickly we're going to come out of it. But yeah, the only way up from here is interest rates. That's very clear. So that's going to add to lending costs. It's also going to strengthen the New Zealand dollar, which is already high. So that's not going to hurt. That's not going to help exporters.
And how much further might the dollar rise? There appear to be indications that it could be on the way up to quite a lot higher levels, perhaps.
Who knows? I mean, it's always hard to forecast. Yes, going up quite a lot more is what most economists and forecasters are picking. Depends obviously a lot on how hard and fast interest rates go up.
The dairy price rise will perhaps add a little bit of fuel to some of the speculation on the New Zealand dollar that it is going to go higher, Bernard?
Well, it's interesting this week that the New Zealand dollar has been up and down following what's happening in Europe. And if farmers want to work out where the New Zealand dollar is going, they need to look at what's happening in Greece in particular and the European zone. This week, Standard & Poor's cut the credit rating for Greece to junk. This is the first time a euro currency has ever been downgraded to junk. This pushed the euro down and caused many people in global markets to be concerned about risky currencies. And one of those is the New Zealand dollar. So the New Zealand dollar actually fell on all of this. If there is another financial crisis similar to the one we saw with Lehman Brothers or the collapse of the big investment banks in the States, that could see the New Zealand dollar fall, which would be great for New Zealand farmers. But whether it's sustained is another thing. So for those farmers wondering every morning when they get up what's going to happen to the currency, keep an eye on what's happening with Greece, the Eurozone, and with global financial markets, which are going into another very rocky period.
And what about on-farm costs, Ellen? There have already been quite considerable price rises in terms of fuel going up, other costs of these sorts. This is all going to have an effect, isn't it?
It's all going to hit them in the pocket and it's going to hurt. With the drought, they're going to be needing more feed, so their costs of that are going to go up. Fuel's going up. Electricity prices are likely to go up through the winter and stuff. So, yeah, that's not such good news.
No.
And it means too that there isn't going to be that demand to buy farms. In the past, when we saw a payout over $6 a kilogram, people thought boom time on farm prices. But this time around, the banks are not lending willy-nilly in the way they were in 2006, 2007. And also many farmers are being much more careful. They're not going straight for capital gains now. They're actually doing their sums and working out whether the cash will come. And then, as Ellen says, with higher fertiliser prices, fuel prices, feed prices, and the drought, I think we're not going to see a return to the boom times in land prices. If anything, the pressure is going to be continually down on land prices.
So we're not going to see a sudden explosion of interest in farm sales, particularly those properties that have been on the market for a year, maybe more.
That's right. Because the banks have this uncertainty about how much capital they have to put behind their loans, and they're also under enormous pressure from the Reserve Bank to be careful about how they fund their lending. They're having to borrow money from mums and dads in New Zealand and through long-term bond issues and then lend it on in New Zealand. In the past, they could go out into these hot money markets and borrow hand over fist and then lend it on to New Zealand farmers. That won't happen again. So we're unlikely to see the sort of credit-fuelled boom in land prices that we saw through 2005, 6 and 7. If anything, the pressure is going to be pressing down on land prices.
But there's still going to be some farmers out there, or maybe not farmers as yet, very interested in the idea of dairy conversions, doing the sums at the $6.10 payout, aren't they?
That's right, but even with the 30 to 40% fall in land prices we've seen so far, that's not enough for many people to make those sums work. And partly they just can't get the money. Where previously they could borrow 60, 70, 80% of the farm's value from the bank to do the conversion or to buy the neighbour's farm, that's just not going to be there. The banks, if anything, many of them are reducing their lending, and where you see any increase in lending, it's not likely to be for land, it's more likely to be for seasonal finance, particularly with the drought kicking in and some farmers having to go back to their banks to buy feed. So I don't think many farmers or New Zealanders understand what's happened in the last couple of years. We've had the biggest debt crisis in living memory. We now have to deleverage. That means banks are not going to be lending willy-nilly, and we're not going to have the credit boom that we saw in the last 4 or 5 years.
But what's going to happen in the medium term, Ellen? You can't have all these potential vendors of property, all these potential purchasers, and never the twain shall meet, can you?
Well, you can, and it's not really very good news for anybody. You can, as Bernard said, everyone will be doing their sums. They'll be double-checking them, triple-checking them, adjusting as many variables as they can. Just think it's going to be a very slow market, and people that are forced to sell or have to sell because they want to go into other areas might not be getting the prices that they're hoping for.
We have a bit of a Mexican standoff, as Ellen points out, between the buyers who really want to get something at rock bottom and those people who are selling, particularly those who aren't under pressure. Let's say they're retiring. Remember that the average age of dairy farmers is close to 60. They may not be able to hand on to a son or a daughter, so they're looking to exit, but they're not under pressure, so they're not going to take a low price, whereas the people who are selling are under pressure from their banks. The banks seem to have lost patience with a lot of farmers. We've seen that obviously with the McCrafers, the McVitties and various others, and this is where the pressure will come on for a few farm sales to go through at very low prices.
So not a good time to be a rural real estate agent.
No, I think time to go to the beach, perhaps.
Perhaps. Now, in more optimistic news, there's the suggestion of a meat industry partnership being put up to government, to its primary growth partnership for funding, looking to emulate what the dairy industry has done in terms of doing the real paddock to plate scenario in terms of consumers knowing exactly where their end product is coming from. What chance do you think this has of getting through, ticking all the boxes, Bernard?
It may well go through the government system and they may get some funding to do it. The question is, will it actually achieve that paddock to plate aim, the holy grail of the meat industry in New Zealand? They've been watching over the fence at what's happening in the dairy industry and saying, if only we could do that. But my personal view is these sorts of committees, government-run processes don't work. True innovation, which gets farmers much closer to customers, that requires entrepreneurs, that requires technologists, engineers in